Namaskar. A good day to you all. I am K.L. Prasad. I am Principal Advisor in the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. I feel it is a privilege to talk to faculty members on the subject which I am currently engaged in and I am very passionate about. So, the topic for this session is the state of Indian agriculture and policy challenges ahead. There are two parts to this session. One is actually the state of Indian agriculture, how it is and what ails it and what are we doing about it. The second one is more important. I will focus more on the second aspect, that is the policy challenges ahead. Traditionally, India has always been an agricultural based economy. There are four macroeconomic management concerns. They are the level of GDP, the macroeconomic stability or the level of inflation, the fiscal balance or the fiscal policy, sustainability of the fiscal policy, and then finally external sector balance or the balance with regard to exchange rates. All the four major concerns are linked to Indian agriculture, and my topic I will try to weave it around this four major concerns. Of course, I have not talked to you about the fifth major concern, which is implicit in the GDP metric, that is employment. In advanced economies, they focus on what is known as a non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, NAIRU. But in the context of India, we focus more on headline inflation and the drivers of that headline inflation. There are two drivers. One is food price driver, which is outside the realm of monetary policy framework. The other one is the overall aggregate demand. So, beginning my lecture, I would like to focus on the first aspect, which is the macroeconomic outcome in terms of GDP growth or GVA growth as they call it now. Earlier it used to be called GDP at factor cost, but now they call it GVA at basic prices. Now, if you see that metric, how it has gone over the years, it is as a proportion of GVA, agriculture has declined, which is a natural concomitant of any growth process or development process. But what is unique about India is large sections of populace is still dependent on agriculture for livelihoods or employment. India, the organized sector employment is less than 10%. So, bulk of the employment is in unorganized sector, which is more in terms of livelihood, and dependence on agriculture is very large. Even now close to 50% of the workforce is engaged in agriculture. Some of you may call it disguised unemployment, some of you may call it underemployment, but the fact remains that people are still engaged in agriculture. And what can we do about that? Suppose we do have the option, policy option to kind of provide employment from agriculture to other sectors should be the key to employment problem. But we do not have that option. Absorptive capacity of the other sectors is what matters. We do not have enough absorptive capacity in either in manufacturing or in services to take the people who will be released from agriculture. So, that is a major macroeconomic concern. So, the data is there that the write up will be shared with you. So, you can look at the data and see how it has progressed. Now, the second part of the macroeconomic concern is macroeconomic stability or prices. In India, we have traditionally focused till about 15 years back focused on wholesale price index inflation. But what is more important is the consumer price inflation, and if you see the GDP measured in terms of the expenditure metrics or metrics, consumption demand occupies the bulk of GDP at market prices. So, that means if you divide the consumption of the populace into deciles, large sections of rural and urban population fit into the lower deciles, and as such consumption demand is affected by the headline inflation. Agriculture has a great bearing on this, because if agricultural policies properly in place, not properly in place, you will have a food price shock, and that is going to be a major macroeconomic shock. So, these two things, agriculture is important. Agriculture is also important in terms of fiscal as well as external sector balance, but I will not focus on that. Suffice it to say that in fiscal balance, our food subsidy bill is quite large, and if we have to operationalize nutritional security of pulses and other things, I mean the sustainability concerns will come into fiscal balance. The third or the final aspect is the external sector balance. Suppose we do have a surplus, agricultural surplus. Now, if we are competitive, we can export it, but if we are procuring and public stocking, WTO does not allow us to export because the rules do not permit it. So, we need to be competitive. So, I am trying to now tell you in the current conjuncture, we are having a problem of plenty or surplus production in many crops. In some of the crops we are not, like for instance oil seeds, we still bulk of the final product, which is the edible oil, continues to be imported. So, we are not self-sufficient in terms of oil seeds, but in most other crops we may have temporary disequilibrium, but otherwise we are broadly in an excess supply condition. Now, if you have to export that, your domestic price or the minimum support price which we set should be below the international price. That is the only way in which you can export your product, produce surplus produce, and then sustainably address the excess domestic production over demand. So, there are I will be glad to share with you that there is a study by Niti Aayog which states that even by 2030-33 we will be in a position of surplus in terms of food production over our consumption demand. Consumption demand, as a students of economics, you will know that cannot change abruptly. It is a function of income. So, the marginal propensity to consume is not going to abruptly change. So, if we increase production through increased productivity, because area cannot be increased, that is one of the major drawbacks vis-a-vis other sectors. The growth rate in agriculture is low because the drivers of growth, only one driver is operational in terms of agriculture, that is productivity gain. In terms of other sectors, you can deepen your capital input, or you can deepen labor or other factors of production and get a higher growth rate or higher output. But in agriculture, we are bound by the availability of land, and the availability of land is limited. So, our entire growth comes from productivity in terms of crops. Of course, there is a non-crop sector. There has been a changing composition of the non-crop sector, which is which will be displayed to you in the screen, where you can see that it is changing slowly. There is a greater growth which is coming from livestock and the fishing sector. So, we are able to change the composition in this way. So, if you see that growth rate over various years, there has been no negative growth rate except in a few years, probably in 2014-15 and then in 2002-03. This has been made possible by the shift in the composition, and if you as students of economics or statistics, you should be knowing that what is important to understand is that the volatility of growth has come down. There is a measure which is known as the coefficient of variation. Now, if you see that coefficient of variation has declined from 2.7% in the period 1961 to 1988 to 1.6% in 1989 to 2004 and further to 0.8% during 2005 to 2018. So, this has been made possible by the shift in the composition of the sector in favor of allied sectors rather than focusing on crop agriculture. So, now what is important is that our supply is in excess of demand. So, how have we gone about dealing with this problem in the government? We have a policy of procuring the crops, announcing an MSP for that purpose, procuring the same and trying to distribute it through an alternative mechanism. Insofar as cereals is concerned, wheat and rice are the two major crops which are procured in large measure, roughly about 30 to 35% of these are procured. So, what happens is effectively we shift the supply curve to the left side of the if you draw up traditional graph of demand supply, the supply curve shifts to the left, and that shift is permanent because we have sequestered the procured grains from the market and we are distributing it in a public distribution system. Whereas in non-crop rice or non-wheat crops, this shift may be possible only in the short or immediate term, because ultimately the same produce which we have sequestered has to come back to the same market, and if expectations is going to drive the prices along with what is coming day to day transaction of demand and supply, that is going to be of not much use. So, you can in short the problem can be solved through a procurement and distribution option only if there is a sequestration of this produce, and only if there is what is known as a short term or spot market disequilibrium. Structural equilibrium will be determined by demand and supply. So, this is what is very important. So, the policy challenge is how do we address it in a sustainable manner. What we have done so far is that we procure, there are two options we have done. One is procure and then distribute, whichever way depending on the crop. The second way is give a deficiency payment to the farmer for the price which he discovers in the market. Suppose the price which he discovers in the market is much less than MSP. The difference between the modal wholesale price and the MSP is directly credited into the bank account of the farmers. So, this scheme was first initiated in Madhya Pradesh, and then now it is a part of our own Government of India scheme called PM Asha. You can read it, read details of this in my lecture notes, so that I will not go through. Now, the policy which I am trying to focus is how we have over the period evolved our policy of support to agriculture is that we fix minimum support prices for 22 agriculture crops. If you include the FRP as a part of MSP, FRP for sugarcane as a part of the MSP, then we have 23 crops. Now, these MSP crops account for 99% food grain production in the country. There are other crops like for instance perishables, onion, tomato, and then vegetables, fruits, for which no MSP is determined because they are perishable in nature, they cannot be stored. So, there is no point in fixing an MSP and then procuring them. Procurement option is not there, but still we do have a scheme called market intervention scheme. When there is a certain threshold price is broken or a certain threshold of production is reached, we do intervene in the market. Of course, we take the losses which is incurred in the purchase from the farmers at the determined price, and then what we are able to sell it finally in the market at a later point of time. Of course, within a very, very short time we have to sell it. So, that losses is borne by the government. These are the things which we are going. Now, let me talk to you about the challenges in this regard of managing surplus, because if you remember till about 2012, 13, 14, headline inflation used to be very high and sometimes in double digits. This was driven by inflation in food, largely by inflation in food. Of course, in 2-3 time periods where oil price shocks were there, oil prices, that is oil means I mean petroleum oils. So, that has also been a driver of the headline inflation. But if you see the spikes to inflation, it has always come from inflation in pulses and inflation in vegetables and fruits. So, what we have tried to do is we have tried to kind of stabilize these prices. What we have done is we have increased the MSPs of pulses significantly over the last few years, because headline inflation used to be largely driven by pulses inflation. So, to address this deficiency in pulses production over relative to demand, we either have the option of importing it, but when India goes into the world market to scout for this gap in between demand and supply, domestic demand and supply, the price, international price shoots up, because they are not producing that surplus, because nobody will produce something which is is not in demand currently globally. So, they can happen with a lag. So, prices are going to go up, and that option of course, we have also had a kind of a MOU with certain countries for supplying certain quantity of pulses, or those kind of things are there, like Mozambique. Then we also import largely from Myanmar pulses, but these are gap filling options. Our sustainable option has been that we raise the level of MSP of pulses to the certain extent, so that people in rain fed area, it is grown in rain fed conditions. So, people in rain fed area feel incentivized to grow more of pulses, so that the price volatility, the production goes up and the price volatility comes. So, we have achieved significant success. Of course, we have also imported a large quantity when there was in 2014-15 there was a huge demand supply mismatch in pulses. We had imported large quantities, around 6 million tons in 2016-17, and I think 4.5 million tons in 2017-18. Together with this the import, the availability has gone up. So, what has happened is it has resulted in a situation where the wholesale prices of pulses are currently ruling below MSP. So, we have some I have some data, we can look it up. So, some of the wholesale prices, which is in shaded area, you can see are ruling below MSP. So, these in many of the crops, particularly pulses, because we had raised the MSP, and in 2018-19 in the budget speech, the Honorable Finance Minister announced this predetermined principle to set the minimum support price for all Kharif and Rabi and as well as commercial crops at a level of 50% over the weighted average cost of production of these crops. So, we have operationalized this principle. So, there has been a level jump in many of the crops, including nutri-cereals. So, what has happened is market is not able to price that correctly, because it goes by demand and supply condition. So, what has happened is that there is a large gap. Now, the problem is how to address this gap. One way is to do the traditional procurement and then distribution, but as I have told you already, there is no way we can sequester this. There is no public distribution system for window available for disposing of pulses or oil seeds that we procure. So, it has to be sold in the market. So, notwithstanding the fact that from 2016-17 we have had a bumper pulses production in close to our demand. See, roughly it has been estimated that consumption demand is about 23 million tons. Pulses used to be produced only in India about 18 to 19 million tons. Now, we are in excess of 23 million tons. So, the problem has persisted. So, we have tried various options. So, I will focus on this particular challenge. There was an economist, Dutch economist by name Jan Tinbergen. He postulated that government must have equal number of instruments to deliver upon a number of targets or objectives it has. Suppose you have two objectives, you need at least two instruments to deliver upon that. But what we have hitherto done, and most governments have done, is try to set the price in such a manner that it benefits the producer, assures remunerative price to the producer, and at the same time keeps the consumer prices low, because if the consumer price goes up, macroeconomic stability will be affected. So, largely so far till about 4-5 years back, this debate of who will get precedence over in terms of price they get, it has always been settled in favor of consumers. Now that in 2018-19, of course earlier also we have done that in a non-structured way, we have announced that farmers will get a remunerative price, and we have defined the remunerative price as 50% over weighted average, all India weighted average cost of production. So, once we have done that, now so we have to enforce that, otherwise it will still be the farmers will be left to the mercy of the markets. Now, the farmers need this support, because if they have to grow, they have to grow, take the decisions for growing the crop in advance. So, they have only the current prices as an indicator to go by. So, in economics there is a phenomenon called Cobber Phenomenon. It means that the decision of the producers, particularly agricultural producers, are taken on the basis of current prices, whereas what matters is the future prices. So, like for instance in stock market, there you have heard of something called the herd mentality. So, if a farmer sees that onion prices are rather high, he will be feel incentivized to grow onion crop. But if millions of producers are there, take simultaneous herd like decision, what will happen is that they will not even get the cost back, and we do not have an MSP. So, sometimes you will hear stories of farmers throwing their crops in the field as a way of protest, because they do not get remunerative prices. So, remunerative prices for farmers should be the paramount in this thing. So, that we are doing. So, now in the current conjuncture, the question is, how do we ensure that the wholesale prices stay close to MSP, because we cannot, even in cereals which is distributed under a public distribution system, we do not procure all the cereals that is produced. We do not assure MSP to all the producers of rice or wheat. By procuring about 30 to 35%, we are able to set the market price above the minimum support price benchmark. Now, we have to follow that in pulses and oilseeds, because that is how you can deliver on that. So, we have stepped up the procurement, but this procurement model is not working, because even though we try to shift the supply curve to the left, the market is pricing that it is going to come back, there is an excess structural equilibrium, disequilibrium, so it is coming back. As student of economics or teachers of economics, what you should focus is on 3 time horizons whenever you understand a phenomena. One is the spot market or the short term or immediate term, sorry. The second one is the short term or the cycle, the business cycle or the crop cycle, and the third one is the structural or a long term equilibrium. We can address temporary mismatches in supply and demand, which is in the spot market or in the cycle, by this procurement, storage and distribution at a later time point. But we can't shift the demand, we can't shift the supply curve to the left hand side if there is a structural mismatch. So, we have to have an option of trying to diversify the farmers' cropping pattern to other crops, and for that we need a whole lot of information, we need a whole lot of academic work or research work to back it up. So, what is happening is that the farmers will not shift unless there is a guaranteed return which is available to it and which you can foresee. I may say that expert opinion may say that please shift to this crop, you may get a better thing, but people are not shifting from a resource intensive crop like paddy, wheat or sugarcane, because these mean in terms of income to the farmer much more than other crops. This can be understood by a simple metric called cost of production. Now, there is a difference between cost of production and cost of cultivation. Many of the people in whom I have interacted with in students, they do not know the difference between the two. See, the cost of cultivation is something which is area based. A farmer has let us say a hectare of land, so he grows some crop in that. So, till the time comes for cutting the crop, it can be only expressed as per hectare cost. Now, when the crop is cut, then you have a new dimension going into that, how much is grown in that area of land, that is cost of production. So, the difference between cost of cultivation and cost of production is the yield. So, given that yield is affected by many considerations, including acclimatic conditions over which not much control is there for the government, but we do have a fix on this yield. For instance, I have given you the difference between the paddy grown in Punjab and the paddy which is grown in Uttar Pradesh. Paddy grown in Punjab fetches roughly 65 quintals per hectare, or the yield is 65 quintals per hectare, whereas in Uttar Pradesh, this is for 2017-18 data, it is 34.3. So, if the costs are broadly similar, Punjab has got largely mechanized agriculture. In other parts, many parts including West Bengal and Uttar Pradesh, there is traditional forms of agriculture where labor forms the bulk of the cost of production, but in mechanized farming there is a difference. But all this does not go to mechanized form of production. The productivity owes to a number of factors, but this difference makes it very profitable in for the same crop in Punjab, whereas it is not profitable in Uttar Pradesh. So, this is one of the ways in which we can address this is yield across states are not comparable, yield across nations are not comparable, because there are much more to it than the just the metric of ratio of amount of number of quintals per hectare. See, for instance, Punjab is very irrigated. In many parts of the country, the irrigation potential is not that high. So, and the soil fertility of the soil plus the other conditions, climatic conditions are different. So, there are many factors which we need to adjust for. So, our focus has been to see that whatever may be the agroclimatic context, there is always a demonstrated yield, that is frontline demonstration yield done by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. That is the maximum in which that particular region can grow up to. Everybody cannot go and match Punjab or Haryana, because the crops are different, the varieties are different, so many things are there. We talk about paddy and wheat as if it is a homogeneous crop. It is not a homogeneous crop. There are different prices in the market for different varieties of crop. So, there is a different variety is being grown, but for comparison purposes it is always useful to have this references. So, this is what what we are trying to do, how to resolve this crisis of excess production over demand. So, what we have done in the procurement model is we have tried to procure, store and then distribute at a later point, thinking that the next time there will be there will be a better a price discovery. But another way is to do is, if we can have large number of farmer producer organization entering the market and then having this kind of role of intermediation rather than the traditional intermediaries, the wedge between the wholesale and prices and the consumer prices adjusted for cost of conversion. A crop which is sold in the primary market is a green crop, but the crop which is the final product which is sold as a rice or a wheat or a gram is a dry one. There is a weight loss, so there is a conversion factor involved in that. So, adjusting for the conversion factor, there is a huge wedge between the two. So, it is only the private sector or the cooperative sector which can kind of play a better intermediary role. If it can play a better intermediary role, then we can do this model of procuring not through the government, through the agencies, and then trying to distribute it in a manner wherein the price discovery is better for the farmer as well as it does not affect the interests of the consumers. So, this is the thing, that risk, that is called the market price risk, that is presently borne by the intermediaries, and if any intermediary, the idea is to maximize his return. So, he will give the lowest price to the farmer and then he will see what is the best price he will sell it to the consumer. So, instead of doing command and control measures like putting stock limits or export bans or import this thing, is there a possibility in which where large cooperative organizations can join hands and then arrive at this kind of this thing. This is one of the solutions which we are trying to do, and we are also trying to promote productivity of such crops in which there is observed shortfall, like in terms of oil seeds and pulses. So, that we are trying to do that, but that productivity has to reckon with the problem of plenty again. So, there are limits to productivity. So, what we are trying to do is we are trying to evolve a system of at least we are engaged in, I do not know how successful we are engaged in trying to find out what are all those crops are in there is observed shortfall over demand. So, you try to see set of practices where it can be grown better, where it can yield better returns, identify that and popularize this through in the form of advisories, so that farmers are able to know that see, as the sowing progresses in a season, right now Kharif season is progressing. We know that there are certain areas in which sowing of a particular crop is in short supply. In all India basis, there is a less sowing in terms of some of the oil seeds or some of the major cereal like paddy. Wherever we want to correct, we can always tell the people who are yet to begin their sowing that you please shift, because given the area and the yield which is available, we know that there is going to be excess production. So, better to shift that. That kind of advisory currently is not in place. Of course, people will have to believe that advisory, but we will work towards that. In this way, I think this is the only way in which we can resolve this Jan Tinbergen problem of trying to use appropriate number of instruments for appropriate number of policy settings. So, to summarize the I would say that we are in the current juncture in Indian agriculture, we are facing the problem of plenty that has to be solved in a sustainable manner, because exports are not possible unless we are competitive. To be competitive, we have to improve yield significantly. As of now, our production is in excess. If we improve significantly, it is going to add up to the problem, though we may become competitive, but the other people, it is a relative term. Exchange rate is not in the hands. Exchange rate actually is not determined nowadays by either the agriculture sector or even by the manufacturing sector. It is determined by capital flows. So, largely amount of capital flows coming into the country determine the external sector balance or the exchange rate. So, the traditional economic postulate that if it is a open economy, the exchange rate will correct, and then decisions can be accordingly the equilibrium can be accordingly achieved in the market, is not available. So, the alternative is to kind of develop an advisory. We are in the process of developing these advisories to the farmers, to identifying, having a management information system, very robust management information system, and we need to give them an incentive. So, right now what we are doing is we are trying to have two major schemes. One scheme is that PM Kisan. One of the reasons why farmers remain poor, remember that farmer has a very powerful asset. His asset is worth even if it is an acre or if it is a hectare of land, let us say it is worth 10 lakh rupees. Imagine if you invest 10 lakh rupees in any financial this thing, you will get at least 70%, 7% return. So, that means roughly 70,000 rupees you will get, but the farmer gets much less. I have given the details here in my this thing, please look it up. He does not get even 5% return in the best producing state like Punjab and Haryana. So, in other states it is even less. So, the income of farmers is very less. So, we need to give them some support, so that that support will go towards enhancing his access to inputs, enhancing his access to modern technology, enhancing his access to modern machinery, and thereby trying to improve his productivity and then production and then income. So, our effort has been to kind of put in place an information system that will guide the farmers how to go about it, how to go about taking their decisions based on information that is available from the market, and as well as the second one is to promote cooperative behavior in the intermediation by the farmer group itself, because only by having greater value addition the farmers can get a better price. So, with these words I once again thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. I have a list of references I have shared with the organizers. So, at any point of time you can refer to them. There is a doubling farmers income committee report. I would advise all the people who are interested in agricultural economics to look at it. It is a very comprehensive document. We have our website of the ministry, and then there is a website of the Directorate of Economics and Statistics. My email ID is there. I would be willing to answer. I will be happy to answer any queries you may have on any of the issues I have talked to you about. Thank you.